Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for the room to seat, and we will then start the webinar. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. We have got a wonderful Helen Nicholson who will be with us. She's not going to sit in her seat. She's going to jump around in front of the tables and entertain you and engage everyone in the evening as well, so that we have some high energy, especially on a Monday night in the middle of the City of London. So thank you very much for everyone for being here with us, and to those in the room. Most importantly, I seriously appreciate the effort that has been made to join us. And I know we have got a few others that are on their way up, but we're going to start anyway. And anyone who misses any bits of this are welcome to pick up the recording. So at this point, Helen, you're going to start off by talking about yourself. So I don't need to introduce you, do I?
No.
Good. And over to you.
Thank you. Right. Hello, everyone. There we are. My name is Helen. Quick networking tip. If you want to remember somebody's name, you need to say it 3 times in a conversation. And well, they're not preferably together, but separately. Before I start, I want to share a little bit about my own networking journey, because I think it is relevant. I'm busy with my 4th book on networking for introverts, which will be out in March 2024. And I've reflected on my upbringing and how it influenced my ability to network. So I didn't grow up in a family where my parents knew people who knew people. There are some families like that, where their children grow up and they watch their parents, and their parents actually open opportunities for the children. And that did not happen in ours. These are my parents in that picture over there, and those are my identical twin daughters, who are now 26. One of them lives here in London. And my mother is was a teacher, and my father was an artist. And I think probably the biggest theme in my upbringing was the theme of, there was a lot of love, but there was also a lot of struggle. My parents didn't know people who knew people. So whenever there was a household repair that needed to be done, they would consult the old-fashioned yellow pages. I don't know if any of you remember that. I remember Brick of a business directory. This was obviously pre-Google. But because there were no referrals or recommendations, because they didn't have a good network, they often chose bad service providers. And our roof would get fixed, and then it broke again, and then it would have to get fixed. And there was I come from a very middle-class upbringing. And as I said, there was a theme of struggle. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and we were lucky enough to go to a private school. And the only reason why we were able to do that was because my mother taught at that school. And when I went to school, it was the first time I realized that possibly there's another way to do things, where some people had parents who knew people who knew people. And this brings me to my very good friend from school. You'll see there that girl with the blonde hair. Oopsie. Belinda. Belinda and I were in school together, and her father, Robin Pickford, was one of those men who'd been to schools where he knew people who knew people. And I noticed that they did not have that theme of struggle in their family. There we go. Belinda, the girl with the blonde hair, now heads up Tom Ford in New York. And her father was able to open a lot of opportunities for her. And the difference between my upbringing and hers came to kind of fruition, or really I learned a very valuable networking lesson in 1990. We were 20, we were students, and during our university holidays, we went backpacking through Zimbabwe and Malawi. Zimbabwe, I had friends and family to stay with, but in Malawi, we knew no one. And at that stage, the Malawian financial system was quite primitive, especially in rural areas, and they had a traveling bank. There wasn't a formal banking system, and you had to cross paths with a traveling bank to exchange money and get currency. And we, unfortunately, missed the traveling bank one specific day in Blantyre, Malawi. And I'll never forget it, because it was one of my most terrifying networking moments. Because we were 2 young 20-year-olds. We didn't speak the language. We didn't know anyone. And we were stranded without any money. There were no cell phones in those days. And we also didn't have credit cards because we didn't have a job. And I'll never forget, the owner of the backpacking lodge said to us we were allowed 1 phone call. And I had to think very carefully about who that phone call was going to be, because it wasn't going to be my parents, because they didn't know people who knew people. And I thought of Robin Pickford. And I thought he imports goods into Africa and he had a good African network. And at that exact moment, I made that phone call. And within an hour, $50 arrived at our backpackers lodge. And that was the first time I realized the power of networks to solve your problems, both personally and professionally. And I can tell you now, as a 53-year-old owner of a business, I can honestly say I've changed the networking trajectory in our family. I'm now one of those people who know people, and my children have learned a different lesson. And I do think the currency that has enabled that to happen is generosity and connecting with people. So I think, a lot of people have a problem with the word networking. There are very few people that go, oh, networking, yay. They're often associated with schmoozing, with kind of people being inauthentic, dull, boring cocktail parties where people are kind of air kissing each other and looking over people's shoulders to see who else is more interesting in the room. The networking we're talking about today is genuine, authentic connecting. It's about you and meeting someone where your business relationship becomes 1 + 1 = 3. That's the kind of networking we talk about. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID and hybrid working, in the last 3 years, Harvard has said that people's networks have diminished by quite a staggering 21%. So that's almost a quarter of your acquaintance network. So if you think about it, they say that on average, when you go into an office, you bump into between 8 and 12 people. So in the coffee queue or at the water cooler. If you imagine for the time that hard lockdown happened, or however many times you go into the office or not, those 8 to 12 people have been taken out of your network for a cumulative period of time. And I think the other interesting thing that's happened is people's attention spans have changed. People have gone from kind of YouTube type attention to a much more TikTok style attention. So, and I'm very aware of that, so I'm trying to move along swiftly with this presentation. So those two things have had a big impact on people's networks and their ability to brand themselves. And I believe it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's not just who you know, but who knows about you. We do a lot of work in leadership development, helping leaders be better leaders. And one of the things that I realize, I come across a lot of people who say my work should stand for itself. I'm good at what I do. And I believe that invisible contributions have no value because people don't know who made the contribution. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on your brand, the brand of you, because personal branding is the why and networking is the how. Because otherwise we could go directly into how to do kind of break into conversations, etc. But unless you know why you're doing it, personal branding is that why, and it's incredibly important. So as we sit here today on the 17th of July, 2023, you already have a personal brand. It's what people are saying about you when you're not in the room. And I'd like you to do an exercise before you go to sleep tonight. I'd like you to send out 6 WhatsApps. Choose 6 people and say to them, I've just been through a personal branding networking session. If you had to describe me in one word, what would that word be? When my twins were 8 and I got involved in this work, I said to them, if you had to describe mommy in one word, what would that word be? And identically, they both looked up at me and said, rushed. I said, rushed. They said, yes, mommy, you're always late. You always catch your wrist like this. And I was devastated that that was my brand. And I actively worked to change that. And I now give them feedback about their brand. Kind of over our December holiday, we give each other some feedback. But I like that definition. It's a gut feeling about a person, a product, or an organization. It often is not happening in your head or your heart, but it's just that gut feeling that you have. So what are people saying about you when you're not in the room? And let's look at some product brands. If I said BMW, what words do you associate with BMW? Speed. Speed? Prestige. Prestige?
That car going on Chapman's Peak threatening to go over the edge or not going over the edge.
Any
think of that ad that lasted about 2 seconds.
Yes, whatever very, very famous. Does anyone have any negative perceptions about BMW? indicators optional. Often you find that people either really like them or they really dislike them. It's not a neutral brand. People kind of have quite a strong feeling about it. Diesel jeans. Diesel jeans cost a lot, probably, 300, at least 300 pounds. What is going to make you spend 300 pounds on a pair of diesel jeans versus M&S kind of branded jeans?
Looking cool.
Yeah. And so you believe that you're getting a better product when you buy those jeans?
So I suppose.
It's what it does for my ego in the eyes of others.
Yeah. So in other words, there's a perception you're getting. I know nothing about jeans, but what I can say is if you apply the same law to yourself, in my experience, people who brand themselves powerfully earn more money than people who don't. Because there's a perception that you are cooler, you are more prestigious, etc. And that's why this is so important, because otherwise you become invisible. And invisible people don't get promoted, and they don't get the salary increases that you want. So I like this. It's obviously what your brand already exists, but it's the sum of every touch point. So if you think of every email you send, every person you speak to on the phone, every WhatsApp you send, every document that goes out of your hands is an opportunity to build up or break down your brand. And that brings us to this concept of, if you were a brand, what brand would you be? So I ran the New York Marathon in 2011, and I ran it in ASICS running shoes. And I have a knee injury, so every time I see my pink ASICS running shoes, they do two things to me. One is they think I can do anything I put my mind to, and secondly, they help me with my injury. So that's a brand that speaks to me. So if you were a brand, what brand would you be? Because we can't have any no-name brands coming out of this session.
I once went through an exercise. They said you had to describe yourself as a motor car.
Mm.
What motor car would you be? And I could only come up with one, which was the car I had, a Jaguar sports car.
Ah,
Top end, supercharged.
Go Sharon. Anyone else? If you have to think of some of your interests, are you an outdoorsy person? You could kind of be Patagonia, or you've got a lot of energy. You could be Red Bull.
The other one is ever ready batteries.
Yeah, there's a lot of components in your life. So you could live down like Balsa Rats, I could live down that road, live down the work road, music, enjoy a lot of music. So you've got all these different possibilities.
So I'd like you to think about that. And it's an interesting exercise for those of you with teams. Do it in your team, because everyone currently has a perception of you already. And it's really interesting to get that feedback from those 6 people that you're going to send up those WhatsApps to.
I think what's difficult with this kind of exercise, asking that question, especially in a room like this, is it's very revealing of yourself.
Yes.
And we are, well, I don't know, tend to be modest kind of people, like, oh, I'm not going to say, I only drink champagne, or
Yeah.
because that's quite revealing.
Yeah.
But it's a Fiat 500 electric car, if you want to know.
I love it.
So, but bad choice.
And you're good for the environment too.
There we go. So, I think that's why that's such a difficult question, especially in a room, because it's revealing. Because you have to be really honest, don't you? You can't say I'm this, but actually you think you're that.
As you were saying, I suppose there's different sides of your personality as well, depending on sort of, is it a weekend, is it a hobby, is it work life?
It's always the weekend.
And you raise a great point there, because the more consistent you are across, because we all have different facets of our brand. The social one, if you're a dad, if you're a husband, if you're a father, if you're, all your different facets. But the more consistent you are, the more authentically you connect with people from a branding perspective. People who wear very different hats, where they are completely different people at home and at work, that it takes up a lot of energy to do that. And I think let's rather use that energy to be you, because your best brand is you squared. It's the best version of you.
Why would you say people are very different at home and work? Which is the more authentic self?
No, I think that I've coached people and I've seen so many different reasons come up. Often it's that they don't like what they do.
Don't like their job.
Yeah. so that they, they actually feel they have to put on a persona, where I believe you can have both. That I am lucky enough to find a job that I love, and I have a personal life that I have developed and grown, and living a life that I want to live. So I think that immediately is a kind of red flashing light to say there's some work to be done there.
If they're not aligned.
The closer they are, the
Yeah,
better,
Yeah.
the better it has to be, because the less stretch.
because it's very tiring.
I've got to be enjoying it, I suppose. That's the idea, isn't it?
Yes.
Enjoying what you do.
Yes, that is a good personal brand is built around your strengths and not your weaknesses. And often, unfortunately, especially in the leadership development work we do, I find that people are more in touch with their weaknesses than they are with their strengths.
That's interesting.
If you have to immediately ask all of you, list your top 5 weaknesses, all of you would be able to answer that question and possibly come up with 10. If I immediately ask, what are your top 5 strengths? Do you have absolute clarity about what they are? A lot of people don't.
And is that our self-modesty to the point you made a moment ago, or are we just not self-aware?
I think it's a bit of both. And I also think we have our brain has a negativity bias. So in other words, it's always keying into what's missing.
To improve.
Yes, exactly. So if you had to describe me in one word, what would that word be? That is the text you're going to send out before you go to bed. Get some feedback from a boss, a colleague, people who know you and whose opinion you trust. Do some 360-degree feedback, because somewhere in the middle lies probably your brand, between how you see yourself and how other people see you. Now, this is the reason why we need to brand ourselves, because otherwise we run the risk of becoming invisible. I love that video because there's Harvey sitting there with his little suitcase because he fully expects to be chosen. And people who are part of the wallpaper, and often the people who think that their work should speak for themselves, that's the reason why branding is so important, because you need to put up your hand and say, choose me. Because if you don't say, choose me, you become part of the wallpaper. So this is one of my favorite product brands, Black Cat Peanut Butter. It's the crunchy one, the one with the green lid. Every time I go back to the supermarket and I choose that, I have an expectation it's going to taste the same. It's the last time I bought it. And that consistency is a key element of successful brands. So one day I was flying from Joburg to Cape Town, and we're taxiing down the runway, and my tray table falls down. And I see that there's a huge coffee stand in the middle of my tray table. So immediately what's going through my mind as a client of that airline, I'm thinking, they haven't checked the cleanliness of this cabin. And if they haven't checked the cleanliness, maybe they haven't checked the engine. So that one coffee stand suddenly made me go from feeling safe suddenly to feeling not so safe anymore. It's the same when you go to dinner at a restaurant and you go to the bathroom and you walk through the kitchen and you see that the kitchen looks dirty. Immediately it makes you worry about the quality of your food. So I believe we have coffee stains on our personal brands. So a coffee stain, just like it was on that tray table, is a negative behavior that sits on your shoulder and prevents your brand going to the next level. So for me, I got feedback from people about 3 years ago that my coffee stain was email. I was a one-finger typist. I fixed that over COVID, but I didn't reply to emails within 24 hours. But people said to me, Helen, you're this networking branding person, and we don't hear from you within 24 hours. And the problem with coffee stains is often we get famous for our coffee stains. And so it can be, what you perceive as quite a small thing, but I'm saying I've recently, for example, I had a look at some of your LinkedIn profiles that you were on the list. Now, a LinkedIn profile could be an example of a coffee stain. If your LinkedIn profile does not represent you, if I ever get to meet you in person, then that potentially is something that holds your career back. So I've got some examples. So that would be a LinkedIn profile. How I saw, as I said, some of you, they look decent and good. Recommendations are very important. And obviously being up to date. I go into LinkedIn for 15 minutes once a week. And I connect with a couple of people. I accept a lot of requests. I post, but it's 15 minutes once a week. But it's important to be regular. Visibility online. I can't tell you still to this day how many people don't switch their cameras on during meetings. I did a talk for one of the big 5 auditing companies last year. It was at the end of the day. It was about this time. And at 5 o'clock, the COO switched on their camera. There were 450 of their senior partners on the call. And everyone had their cameras off. She switched on her camera and she was sitting on her unmade bed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, I'm never going to get to meet that person in person. And in front of her 450 colleagues, she was sitting on her unmade bed at 5 o'clock. It was not a great look. You know, and that is a coffee stain because it's not a hard thing to fix. It really is.
Surely someone that senior would know what they do.
You would think. Being unapproachable, you know, do you get feedback from people that you kind of are very unapproachable in terms of your work? Words that come out of your mouth. I think people are very aware of energy. And are you a complainer? You know, in terms of you when people spend some time with you, do they feel energized at the end of that time? Releasing documents without checking them. As someone who's written 4 books, I can tell you that when you're in a document, you don't see the mistakes. And when it's an important document, just have someone else, you know, go through it. Have a colleague just do that final check. It saves so much from a branding perspective. Not closing the loop or keeping stakeholders updated, especially when things go wrong and you go into crisis management, when people get very quiet, that often could be a coffee stain. Talking too much or talking too little. Those can both be coffee stains. So what I'd like you to do is just find a partner, and I'd like you to just have a quick discussion. What do you currently believe your coffee stain is? Just one, not a whole lot of, because we all have them. And if you're sitting here thinking, I don't have a coffee stain, I can tell you that you do. You can go back to those same 6 people who gave you the positive feedback around your brand, explain to them that a coffee stain is a negative behavior that, for example, being late all the time or whatever it is. So will you two, kind of you two, and maybe you two just have a, yes, well, you're my father and daughter, so maybe the 2 of you can go. Yes. So you've got 3 minutes. What is your coffee stain?
I'll take a chair with you.
I know what's mine.
That's easy, is it?
Because we're very negative, it's not much easier than what brand are you? That's why.
What did you very much?
Well, I mean,
It's not always.
I don't know if you can control like that, but I know what you're saying, like people that talk too much. But the problem is you get feeling that they're not self-aware. Is what I speak sometimes when people are talking too much. It's a big room of people, not let them speak. You think, I wouldn't have that question.
Very much, because I'm self-aware, and not so much talking too much, but
Maybe
when
some-
I'm excited about ideas, is my worst habit. Yeah. How about you?
I'm sometimes late. Sometimes a bit disorganised. I'm taking too much. I don't know, we possibly talk over people sometimes. I think sometimes if you're confident in the topic, people get off topic, then you sometimes think they're wasting their time. Maybe you should let them speak a little bit. What other people say? What are common coffee stains?
Some of those that I had up there. So your LinkedIn profile, the being late, the releasing documents without checking it. But your colleagues will tell you what was it.
Yeah.
I'm anything wrong.
And especially when we're under stress. You know. It could be that you're a chronic procrastinator, but it's a very specific behavior. It's not kind of your character. There's a coffee stain is something that's once you become aware of, you can fix it. That's kind of the difference. It's not really you. It's you know, the email was it's not I'm more than replying to the email.
It's not almost.
But people, as you say, people takes over people's view,
Yeah.
which is somewhat unfair.
But often you'll hear when people talk about you, then they go, oh, they're the person who always.
problem
X,
is-
you know.
Well, maybe they learn to call you. But then it's dead.
I might say my business flourished.
I think people do email too much. So, rather than do phone calls. So somewhere.
How much of the generation is the classes you'll hear about it?
But I also think that that depends on picking up my LinkedIn as well, because actually my LinkedIn profile might be a bigger conversation with someone than me, maybe getting too enthusiastic and talking too much or interrupting someone, and depending on the person. But my business partner, if you were to ask her, I think she'd probably say it's organised, we need to think that would be her personal copy stain about me. But she was again super organised. I would say the inverse. She, you know, literally everything had to be planned every time to the T. So it's kind of like that.
Well, you probably was being
It worked. It was incredibly big relationships because of that, because of the awareness. You know, so that she kind of, I had to up my game in the organisation, but she had to, you know, kind of be flexible because life doesn't always go flat.
Exactly. Okay, so have we all ascertained our copy stains? Do we have a long list? I hope not. The moral of the story is find out what your copy stain is and fix it. Because the point that I want to make here today is that you're more than your copy stain. And get some feedback. You are more than your copy stain.
We're so better.
You would totally. You need to fix one at a time. Well, in fact, find out what your present one is, fix it. There probably will be another one in 3 months' time, but I think it's just that, I mean, we just had a delegate at one of the banks who was not promoted based on her LinkedIn profile. And it was within the organization. And she was hugely surprised. And so were other people because, you know, the organization already knew her. But they said it meant that she didn't take her brand seriously enough. So what I'm saying is copy stains something, and to your point, is often it's in the eye of the beholder. If you think of what is important to your stakeholders, then you've got to make sure that your copy stains, if it's the most important thing in terms of that my client is, you know, I've got to reply to their emails and I'm not doing that, then that is a very important copy stain. So I would like you to, but we've done that. So the second part of a good brand is relevancy quotient. So I went to a conference at Google 6 years ago, and it was the first time I'd heard about this concept. So relevancy quotient is, why does Coca-Cola still advertise? You can go anywhere in the world and people know Coca-Cola. They still advertise because they want to remain relevant. And good brands are always upping their game. In exactly the same way as people, we've got to up our game too. Because as Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I like what Peter Drucker said as well, especially post-COVID. I think it's a very valuable. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. None of us had ever gone through a pandemic before. We found skills within us that we'd never known before. And it's to constantly up our game. Now, when I came back, I'm going to go do this. When I came back from Google, I adopted relevancy quotient goals. So every year I would set a personal and a professional one. So last year in 2022, I wrote a book on mindfulness, and I'm going to give one of them away this evening. And we started a podcast. I knew nothing about podcasting at the beginning of 2022, and I'm amazed what you can do. So that was my professional goals last year. And I decided to also learn how to touch type finally, so that I could reply to my emails and deal with my coffee stain. And my husband and I started to dance. We are very bad dancers and completely uncoordinated. And to keep, because from a brain perspective, you want to keep the neuroplasticity going in your brain. And in order to do that, you've got to do new things because we get very stuck in our ruts. And so you've got to choose something that's hard and something that you struggle with. So this year, I have a friend who's dying of pancreatic cancer, and so every morning I have one of those Wim Hof showers. I don't know if you know Wim Hof, his work, which is all about, your inflammation, your body is decreased when you're exposed to cold water. So part of my routine is now switch on the freezing cold water, and I've been increasing it kind of by a couple of seconds every day and every week. And I think about her, and I also think about the fact that I don't want to get cancer. So that's been one of my relevancy quotient goals for 2023. My second one is doing this course that I'm doing here in London and coming here every 90 days. So, and they've been hard, both of them for different reasons. And recently I was in Greece and I did some open water swimming, because we'll come back to that. I've come up with a high performance model, which I think is really useful, because bravery is the currency of relevance. And I just want you to think about that for a moment. Bravery is the currency of relevance. And you can't be brave if you're not well. So if you're not sleeping, you're not eating nutritious food, you're not looking after your body, it's very hard to be brave. And if you're not brave, you actually can't be relevant. So that is the kind of high performance model of your well-being, followed by bravery, and that leads to relevance. So I'd like for you to think, kind of, and you don't have to answer it now, but I'd like to plant the seed, is what are your relevancy quotient goals for the rest of 2023? Personally and professionally, I'd like you to pick something. So it could be some hobby that you've been trying to do or wanting to do, but you have been hadn't had the time, or you've been too nervous about it. It must be something that scares you, otherwise it doesn't qualify. And from a career perspective, what are you doing? Are you experimenting with ChatGPT? Are you kind of getting your head around all the artificial intelligence tools around? Because I don't believe robots are coming for anyone's jobs. I think they may be coming for dull, boring jobs, hopefully, but I think that they could be coming for people who are irrelevant in terms of their skills. The robots are coming for people who haven't adopted some of the AI and kind of the tech skills that we are all needing to learn. So how relevant are you currently, and what are your goals for the rest of the year? Because then you will always be relevant, and you won't be a kind of Kodak camera. Now, we're going to move now from the personal branding into the networking. So I was at a conference in Canada just before COVID, and I met this guy at the conference, JB Dillon. And he said to me, Helen, I had a terrible networking story where I had to hit a crisis in my career and my life before I became better at the skill. And basically, he relayed the story that he was in a job and the company had financial difficulties. And he'd only been there for 6 months. He was doing well. And they had a philosophy of first in or last in, first out. So as they hit economic difficulties, they said to him, you're going to be retrenched in 5 days. He just had a baby and they just bought a new house. And he said he was absolutely terrified at the financial implications of this. And he said that serendipitously, he went to a conference the next day. He bumped into an old colleague, and that old colleague told him about an opportunity in her team. He was telephonically interviewed by her boss, and he got the job. And he said his takeaway from that was that, so he said, first of all, it didn't happen serendipitously. He said he actually had gone home after he got the news about being retrenched. He wrote out a list of 20 people in this list, and he went onto their LinkedIn profiles, and that woman was on that list of 20 people. In other words, in order of power, who could influence his career. And she was on that list, and he saw that she was going to that conference the next day. And he managed to kind of get an invitation to go because he didn't have time to phone her. He'd still meet in 2 weeks, and the whole process would take a lot longer. But he said his biggest takeaway from that was he did one thing differently in his career, because he said he never wanted to be an SOS networker. An SOS networker is when you only contact people when you're in a jam. And you've got to manage your network a lot more proactively so that you don't get into that position. And what he said is he started scheduling 2 connection slots with his network once a week. So one internally within his organization and one externally. And he said a lot of them happen virtually, but he said he's become a lot more intentional about his network. Because what I've realized, your network has to be intentional because it doesn't just happen. It's got to be curated and actually looked after. So I think that's a great takeaway from the session today, is every week have 1 or 2 connection slots that are curated for people who you don't generally see, because otherwise our networks get very linear. They comprise people who are the same age as us, same industry as us, and and the more sameness you're around, the less powerful your network is. It's got to be people who are different, because the power lies in its diversity. So I want to, because I'm an ex-accountant, I believe in very practical skills. And I want to, this is an interesting question, is who do you think networks better, men or women, generally speaking? Yeah? Differently? One of the big financial services companies did a piece of research a couple of years ago. They studied men and women at an executive level in the organization, and then they found out that for some reason the men were overtaking the women. And they all had the same education, same background, same experience. I wanted to find out why was this happening. And the difference between the two was the difference in the size of their business network. So according to the research, if I was a man and I was diagnosed with some kind of cancer, I would tell 0 to 1 people, my close circle of family and friends. But my business network, they had 50 to 70 people just within that organization to pick up the phone and say, can you help me? Women operate completely differently. So if I was diagnosed with any kind of cancer, my intimate network is bigger, 4 to 8 people. But look at my business network. The average woman had 11 to 15 people. So the woman's got 11 to 15 people, the man's got 50 to 70. Who do you think is going to get places in the organization? So why do you think that happens?
Men want to succeed now. They want to get that top job and they'll put themselves forward, even if it's puffery involved in putting themselves forward. Women will wait and expect to be seen. For all the points you've just been mentioning, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. So say, for example, Tanya and I meet here today and 4 months go by and we've had no contact. And suddenly I have an issue that I think Tanya, who I met at the South African Chamber of Commerce evening, she could help me with it. Do I pick up the phone and phone her or get in contact with her, bearing in mind there's been no contact for 4 months?
I would hope so.
Well, I would, but generally, generally women will not. Because with guys, they can be in grade 1 together, 40 years go by, and they've got a problem and they know that that guy in grade 1 could help them. They will track that guy down, phone him and say, hey, remember me. They remember each other, they help each other, and then they go their separate ways. So women operate more in a system of emotional deposits and withdrawals. So I think because we haven't stayed in touch, because I haven't been out for coffee with you or had a virtual kind of connect, I feel I would be abusing the relationship because there's no emotional deposit. So it's an important thing for us to both understand from a gender perspective, is men are much more transactional and they've got a good acquaintance network. And for the women that are here, we can learn a lot from them around that.
It's also, though, the patriarchy, how we were brought up.
And men have been doing this a long time.
Like
Yeah.
that. So
Yes.
it's kind of, in women's, especially, actually since I started my business 20 years ago, it's hugely changed, thank goodness. But there was a stage where I was the only woman in a room of 40 men networking. So, I think it does have history to it, but thankfully that's getting better.
Indeed, the youngsters today don't see the difference in the way we knew the difference.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I think the youngsters today could learn a little bit from us around the face-to-face network, and we can learn from them around digital networking. So a couple of quick points that I want to leave you with. One is when you're trying to build rapport with people, to our earlier point about talking, take interest in other people's lives. It's, do any of you have dogs at home? Is the dog excited when you come home? That is exactly how we need to be when we're meeting new people. It's less about us and it's more about the other person. Because if you're doing all the talking, you're not doing good networking. Listening is such a key skill. And remembering people's names.
Money Show.
Business books.
Helen. The reason I call her Helen, is because she once introduced herself to me and said, you only remember anyone's name when they introduce themselves to you 3 times. And she introduced herself as Helen.
Thank you, Bruce. So, you've got to, because often when we meet someone, we say their name, but we don't say it again. And 3 times, once or twice is why we forget it. So it really is the magic formula. And thirdly is listening. My mother used to always tell us when we were growing up, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, is we need to use it in that portion. And I love that saying, there's a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to speak. You know, if you think of when you fell in love, we've all been in love, and that oxytocin that kind of flooded through your body, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. And that same oxytocin gets released. That's why when we pay attention to people, you know, my other subject that I speak on and have written about is mindfulness. And I always saw the 2 separate things as being quite separate. But when you mindfully connect with people, that is when you build the best relationships. So a quick small talk technique, because this is one of the things people battle with. So if you were here today, and if you walk into any function, I'd like you to think of rowing, and you think of an oar, O-A-R. There's a great formula called observe, ask, reveal, that when you do this, you can talk to anyone about anything. So I was at the stock exchange recently. So I observed, I was actually the only girl there. So that was my observation. I then asked the person a question. I said, how long have you been investing for? And then the magic is in the reveal, because often if you're talking to someone and they go, yes, no. You know, they don't give you a lot. The reveal is what opens the conversation up. So I said, I'm a novice investor. It's the first time I've been to a function like that. And then suddenly that person steps in for the exit. And sometimes you've got to do observe, ask, reveal a couple of times to get the conversation going. But I'd like to challenge you is thinking, when we finish this, we're going to go and kind of have a glass of wine. And what is your observe, what you ask, and what's your reveal when you're in a place like this meeting new people? And then I want to close with the elevator speech. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this, but if you jump into a lift and someone turns you in and they say, so what do? Do you have a short, catchy, snappy sentence that enables people to understand what it is that you do? And I realized that I had an issue with this a whole lot of years ago. I was at a hotel in Johannesburg, and Oprah was suddenly standing across the muesli from me. And she was dishing her muesli up, and she'd been exercising, so she was kind of sweaty and she was all in her exercise clothes. And no, it was actually the Saxon. So she was dishing out her muesli, and I made the decision not to say hi, because I just thought, you know, she's kind of just come out from exercise. And I always regret that, because if I'd have had a good small talk technique, and that was before I'd learned about this, I could have gotten because I was never going to meet Oprah again. Now, these are my twins, Sabrina and Caitlin, and one of the biggest problems I see with elevator speeches is people are often too much involved in their lives, which are less exciting than what's in it for the other person. And a good elevator speech moves away from you to what's in it for this other person. So, and it needs to focus on your listener, not on. The best one I've ever heard was told to me by a data capturer. She said, I'm the underwire bra of the organization. So she saw herself as supporting. That's a good elevator speech. You know, you would say to that person, tell me more.
Tell me more.
Yes. So the secret is it's quick. It briefly describes what you do and how this benefits your clients. And lastly, it's interesting enough to make your listener want to find out more. So this is the formula. I'm this, I do this, so that. So my one is, my name is Helen Nicholson. I specialize, or I'm the founder of a business called the Networking Company. We specialize in teaching people soft skills so that they can get promoted. Because that's why I know these so-called soft skills are, so that's the so that. That would be for you in the corporate world. And ideally, you need 3 of these. And I'd like you to, when you leave here tonight, start thinking about, you need a family one. So when you're at a family kind of event, and your mother or your aunt says, so what do you do? And you go, I work in marketing, or I work in, whatever it is. Do they actually, they don't have to understand the nitty gritties, but do they have a vague idea? Kind of, and you've got to practice it because it's got to be so rehearsed that it actually appears natural. You need a colleague one, so there you can use jargon, especially in banking, and you need a potential client one. So those are the three, because your so that is different for each one of those three. And then obviously following up. So just out of interest, you all put your name labels on here today. Where is the best place to put them? Right or left? So top right. Right up here. And the reason being, because you shake hands and then you want that person to see your name label near your face. And if you break into
Not down here somewhere.
no, see, so that one would be a so we'll check. So up here.
Well, let's start conversation.
Yes. If you break into a conversation and you're at a cocktail party, how is the best way to break in? What is the best way? Can I ask the three girls? Will you just come and stand here for me? You don't need to do anything else other than stand.
That's what I would do. So I was thinking, I as the lady come join the men having a conversation.
Just stand in a row.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, and you've got your wine glass?
Yeah, it's empty.
Okay.
Well, that is a bit entering, huh? That is actually most of it.
So what we do is you look for a group of three to break into, not 2 and not 4. 3 is the magic number. The reason being is that then you're not interrupting a group of 2, but 3 is a good number. So you'll be chatting, and I now need to decide if I'm going to break into this conversation. So I have my glass, I overhear what they're talking about, and I listen, because if it's something I have nothing in common with these people, that's why this is an important step. Then I can move on or I can join. So at the JC the other day, the first group I sat next to were talking about derivatives. Now, I know nothing about derivatives, and I also am not interested in ever knowing anything about derivatives. So I was like, I'm moving on. So without even them knowing, I moved on. And then I found another group of 3. And with my glass in my hand, I listened, and in this case, Tonya was now talking, and she's talking about something that I had synergies with. And then I make my move. I start looking at her, nodding, acknowledging. The other 2 people will see that she's giving me more eye contact, and suddenly you will be included in it. It works. Mm-hmm. And then you do your observe, your ask, your reveal, because that's how you get the conversation going appropriately. Thank you, ladies.
There's also something good about being great and talking in anywhere. Like sometimes people are just overly nervous, whereas actually at a networking event or an event, everyone actually wants to meet people anyway.
Yeah.
So people generally
Being 6 foot plus helps.
And also as a man, you find that, you are tall and you've got presence. So, you often find when someone is smaller and isn't got the same kind of level of confidence or presence, then it's harder.
Well, the other reason why I always think is people by themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll always go up to a 1.
And actually, you can actually, they're really sort of grateful that you chat to them.
Yes.
And actually, it could be sort of a really good contact, but they haven't felt the need to sort of engage themselves.
Just on that, how do you ditch a person gracefully at an event? Because sometimes you find if you kind of meet a person and then they're going to cling to you for the rest of the evening because you're almost their comfort blanket. So the best way to do it gracefully is to walk with that person. As you walk, they will start to walk, and then what you do is you introduce them to somebody else. And you say, Tanya, burnout. Tanya's a very interesting woman. She does X, Y, Z, and you introduce her to them, and then you get the question.
If there's a group of you,
Yes.
in my case, because of my role, I could quite easily say, do you mind, guys?
Yes.
You want to say, I need to network. And move on. And that also can work. I don't like the option that a lot of coaches will go for is, I'm going to the toilet.
Yes. It's too much information, and all you do is say, excuse me,
I'm sitting on the toilet. No. That's awful.
Yeah.
But a lot of coaches do recommend that.
Yes, no, I don't recommend it. I just think when the conversation gets to that point, then you say, excuse me. So I just want to summarize what we've been through. So we looked at your brand. Please think about those 6 WhatsApps before you go to bed. If you had to describe me in one word, what would that word be? Think of what your coffee stain is. Think of what your relevancy quotient goals are for the rest of the year, for 2023, so that you always are a relevant personal brand in kind of your career. Networking, think of how men and women do this very differently. The biggest thing about networking is generosity. If you approach your network with an open hand, amazing stuff will happen. It's never a 50-50. It's not you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's being generous and abundant, and that will come back to you. Take interest in other people's interests, listen carefully, remember people's names. Small talk is OAR, observe, ask, reveal, and your elevator speech is I'm this, I do this, so. And then follow up after you've met them. And that's where LinkedIn plays such a great role. And I want to end with my shoes. So I don't know if you can see my shoes. They're Stan Smith Adidas sneakers. One of my daughters gave them to me for my birthday last year. And on the side, they go NOIC. And and on the other side, it's got my initials, HN. The NOIC is no one is coming. And often I realize that we spend a lot of time as people in waiting. We wait for bosses to recognize us. We wait for clients to pick us. We wait for partners to pick us. When you realize no one is coming to rescue you, you are the one you have been waiting for. There's a great sense of liberation around it. I told my mother, who's turning 80 in 2 weeks' time, that we teach people that no one is coming. She goes, I can't believe people pay you to tell you that. She says, that is so depressing. She says, I wouldn't pay you 5 cents. I said, Mom, it's actually very liberating because when you realize no one is coming to save you, you are the one you have been waiting for. There is a big degree of personal responsibility.
Can I take this opportunity to formally end the webinar because we've got a online audience.
Yes.
So I just want to end it for the recording purposes and thank you officially for wonderful, wonderful session. I think the amount of points that were brought up that you raised, things that we can all go home about, and your final checklist at the end, I have to say thank you very much. That was nice, short, sweet, and very succinct. I even took notes. Thank you for those. And we do have the recording that is available for everyone. So for those of you who attended in person, you're magic. And for those who have attended online, thank you very much for joining us. And thanks for being with the South African Chamber. And we do have an event tomorrow, which is very popular as well. So hopefully we will see more of you tomorrow. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your time.